Okay, any requests for dedications?
Yes, I would obviously want to dedicate this year as Remembrance Day for um, the millions of Jews that died at the hands of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel. It is today, is that right?
Yom HaShoah, Remembrance Day, that's next week. That's Yom HaZikaron. It's Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Okay, so it's not the fallen from the soldiers of Israel, it's the Holocaust Day. So to the 6 million, I can't even fathom the number. Can't fathom.
Okay, so what it says here, we're going back to Parshat Shmini, last week's Parsha, about we discussed the kosher animals, and actually, let me talk about this week's coming Parsha. I don't know, maybe Damon, you know this. Apologies, it's the Tazria Matzorah, which is basically about infections, and if a person became tamei, then they became tahor after inspection. But then also in the Tazria Matzorah, talks about actually no, so apologies, not that it's the next week's parsha about sacrifices for certain sins that people did, and the Kohen, Gavin, listen carefully because this applies to you. The Kohen was the only one that was allowed to do the sacrifices. The people wanted something sacrificed like a bull, or if they bought the meal offering, the flour and the oil, they gave it to the Kohen, and he did the sacrifice. So, Damon, correct me if I'm wrong. You couldn't do it yourself. You had to give it to the Kohen to do for you. Is it, Gavin? Do you know this?
No, I actually remember. I've got such a good memory.
So
I remember. Remember actually doing this.
I think what happened with Avram's sons, Nadav and Avihu, they were killed because they bought they bought something they weren't supposed to as a sacrifice. So I think if people, Israelim, or people not from the tribe of Levi, the Kohanim especially, would have done the acts of sacrifice for their misdeeds, they may have been killed. I'm not sure, but the Kohen had to do it. They basically gave it to the Kohen, and he did it on their behalf.
Yeah, if you look at all the, we've done Sanhedrin and we're busy with Soita. So that's what I've done in Bava Kamma now. But whenever the temple comes up, it doesn't come up in Bava Kamma really a lot yet. Maybe it will still come. But it comes up quite a bit in Sanhedrin and as well as Soita. Every time that comes up, the Kohanim are involved with every single, you never ever see a private individual doing anything in the temple. It's always, you always, all the avoiders done by the Kohanim, and everything's handed and administrated by them because they know what's cutting. When you walk in there, you're a farmer. You don't really necessarily know what exactly to do. They'll help you and they'll assist you, all the way through. But they do the actual sacrifice.
And do the shechting, that's correct. Thank you. Thanks for thanks for clarifying. So they, like if someone bought a bull for sacrifice, they would actually shecht it and capture the blood in a container, then sprinkle it over the mizbeach, and apparently on the ears for some of the other sacrifices. So it's quite an interesting, lot of detail. But only the Kohanim could do that.
That's why guys when they do Havdalah, often after Havdalah at the end, they dip their fingers in and then put their fingers behind the ears.
Could be something related to that. I'm not too sure. That's actually, I never thought of that.
I think it's related to
that. Well, Damon would know. Damon, you know anything about that?
No, I don't. I really don't. I've got a limited understanding of kochim and processes and tahara and tuma. No, I don't.
None of us.
I also have limited. I just know a little bit. I gave you what I know.
Yeah, we all have some knowledge. Yes.
I just know a little bit.
Thanks for clarifying. You clarified. Thank you.
I hope I'm 100% accurate, but I think I'm 99%.
99.999%.
I can't go that far.
Okay, let's get started.
Just 99.
Okay. All right. Just see what we can achieve in this time frame. I know Arthur's cooking dinner. I hope he can hear us. Okay. Excellent.
I don't know if he can, because I think he's cooked it.
He's been
Excuse the
cooked for
pun.
years, but he's ahead of us. Believe me, those Rabbi Khan. All right, guys, let's cover some ground.
That was just a joke, Arthur.
He's well
Let's carry on.
prepared, you mean, Kevin?
Guys, we're
Damon.
actually losing time.
Yeah, all right, let's continue.
All right, so just a summary. So, the basic premise of it was as follows. Let's give it to you quickly. It's that there was a difference in the Mishnah in terms of where Yehuda and where Rabbi Meir agreed and disagreed. Okay? Because you remember the rabbis taught in the Braisa, if one gives pieces of wood to a carpenter to make a chair from them, and instead, for some reason, a carpenter made a bench, or he gave him pieces of wood to make, and he made a bench instead of a chair. According to Rabbi Meir, he pays the carpenter the value of his wood. Why? Just simply because he hasn't made anything that resembled what was asked. So there's a complete physical change as per instructions, and therefore he acquired that particular item, and he just replaces the value of the wood that he took from the client. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't like that. He says if the improvement to the wood exceeds the expenses of making the chair or the bench, he pays the carpenter the expenses, but not his fee. But if the expenses exceed the improvement to the wood, he pays the carpenter for the improvement. In other words, whatever's the lowest amount. If the expenses are higher, he only pays for the improvement different. And if the improvement is the low amount, he pays the improvement opposed to expenses. Because the consumer has actually got the upper hand because the carpenter completely ignored instructions, you can choose not to really take it at all, or just pay him for, the minimum amount. But Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda agree on one particular aspect, that if you ask someone to make for you a very, very high quality chair, and the chair was particularly ugly, or the bench was particularly ugly, that's not a case where it's a physical change. Granted, it's ugly, but it's certainly recognizable as a chair, although barely. So in that case, Rabbi Meir agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that the client is correct, and he only has to pay the service provider the minimum, whatever's the low amount, whether it is the expenses of labor, or alternatively for the improvement on the market related value. And I can tell you that an ugly chair isn't going to achieve much at the market. Talk about in those times. At these times, they consider it art, and you can finger paint with poo and get $1 million. So clearly, we're not talking about where people have lost their brains today. I'm saying where it wasn't avant-garde, but it was genuinely ugly. Okay. So that was that point of the discussion. Then we went on and we wanted to know, what was this case of, we brought this wood issue up. We were talking about a case of inferior dye compared to the market-related price of dye. And what happened was he used the remnant of dye that was left in the cauldron pot, and it left a variety of hues and certainly wasn't as strong. So that's where this particular Braisa came with that Mishnah, because it mimics it. If you realize, it then brought about a discussion yesterday about dye ingredients to wool, and it said, was there something material to it or not? And I laughed when I learned it, because I said I thought of Kevin using the pun. But what we mean is it a substantial difference where it counts or not? Now, what I said to you is I originally had an argument to myself to think that, what do you mean that the robber doesn't pay? Because we know that even if there's a physical change that takes place, you certainly pay the cash equivalent if the robber acquires that item because of the physical change that's manifested. If you slaughter the animal, sell it, etc., etc., there's 4 or 5-fold, but I mean the physical change requires the animal for the thief, and a non-animal same thing. So obviously the Rashi cleared it up and said, we're not saying that the robber gets away with it. What the Gemara is actually saying is that he cannot replace those original ingredients because they don't resemble what they were. And the pasuk said, if he returns what he stole, if you remember. And that seemingly superfluous word, if he stole, is coming to say it has to be in the same look and feel and state that it was stolen. So we said with regards to the dye, we're not talking about dye that was a solid brick of, you used to get bricks of like dye, etc., and then they'd have to be broken down with a pestle and mortar and added water, etc. So we're saying in that case, the physical change affected the dye for the robber, so the robber would only have to pay the financial equivalent. And the Gemara used the point that the point is moot, meaning it's not even up for discussion. Talking about when liquid dye was stolen, and in its liquid form, it permeated the wool and got absorbed. So the bottom line of the discussion yesterday is we're saying, do we consider the dye something substantial or not to the wool? And one of the arguments that went forward to eventually is that, look, at the end of the day, if the dye wants back his dye, and the robber said, I don't know what you're talking about, there's no dye, you can't say that because his dye was there, and you can't say, well, you then try and remove the dye and get detergent, because that doesn't do anything for the original owner. It doesn't give him his dye back. It might rob the robber of the color, but certainly doesn't help the original owner. So the Gemara reframed the issue, and it said basically that you're dealing with a case of you're dealing with a case of trying to work out a financial compensatory amount. So how do we put in a very, very simple way? Is we said, look, at the end of the day, what generally would happen is as follows: is that your wool might be worth 10 zuz, and your dye is worth 5 zuz. Okay, let's just say it's only worth 3 zuz. Okay, dye's worth 3 zuz, and the wool is worth 10 zuz. Then what would happen is if you returned the wool to the original owner that had been dyed, he would get back both his dye and his wool. So do we say that that would end up being the market-related price, and that should satisfy the original owner of both the wool and the dye, where he got back his full financial value based on the market-related price? Now, we know that it generally would be, because when you go to a haberdashery shop and you dye wool, what's added on there is labor. So very likely the retail price would be less. Sorry, the retail price would be far more than the lesser fee of the dye and the wool combined. So generally that would make restitution for the original owner. So we're saying, well, why is there even a question? So we're saying there's a question in two regards. The first regard is, what happens if there is a oversupply of that particular color of dye in the market? Meaning, if you buy raw dye, it's worth 3 zuz. If you have wool, it's worth 10 zuz. And that would generally fetch about 20 zuz in the market. So that if the robber went to all that effort and he returned the dyed wool, then the original owner is more than compensated. But in a case where there's such a glut in the market, let's just say it is expensive dye. Call it indigo dye. Indigo, because one of the reasons is indigo is permanent, and therefore it's considered a physical change in liquid form, but it doesn't acquire it for the robber in this case, because it was only a case where it was misdyed the wrong color. So when it was misdyed the wrong color, it wasn't intentional robbery. This is intentional robbery, but it was in liquid form, so it's not considered physically changed. In other words, it combined with the wool. So say the last fashion season, there was an excess of sapphire-based wool. Then what would happen is this season they'd be sick of it. So even though, for example, sapphire ink would be worth 8 zuz, and the wool would be worth 10 zuz, for example. It was 18. Last fashion season, it got to a phenomenal rate of 25 zuz. And this season, it would sell for about 13 or 14 zuz. Why? Because there is a glut in the market of an oversaturation of the product. Therefore, they want to get rid of it at less than cost, just to clear it. Now, you would say that at the end of the day, well, then surely that would lower the worth of the dye in general, where the original owner must be satisfied, but it might not be true. It might have been that in that time, already sapphire dyed wool was a glut in the market. However, if you used that sapphire dye and you used it with cotton, it hadn't been used in any degree of saturation, and therefore, as its raw value still maintained its value. And therefore, we want to know is if there's a glut in the market and the price dropped down to where it would be 2 or 3 zuz less of having them combined as opposed to separate items. Does the thief have to reimburse the original owner the sort of dye and give him the wool separately, or would he have to pay the cash equivalent? It doesn't seem, according to Rashi, that there'd be any problem with the cash equivalent. So that was the point that we were talking about. What happens if it's not normal circumstances? So it seemed to establish so far implicitly, but it never stated it outright at all, that if you gave the wool back with dye in normal circumstances, that the two would cancel each other out. And the combined price, especially since the retail had the labor factor, the original owner would be more than compensated. Gemara hasn't been answered yet, but we assume implicitly it has been, by the way. So then it had saying that there was another way to look at the situation. And that was a situation is, what was a case where there was a robber and he dyed a monkey with it rather than wool, in which case the dye brought about no improvement. So obviously I found it hysterically funny. In other words, the guy had a pet monkey. So the robber stole a monkey from the guy, and he borrowed, we didn't borrow, he stole dye from the same person, and he decided to dye the monkey with it. And then the court said to this guy, you know, I think you're a little bit mentally ill. You don't have all your oars in the water, and the monkey must go back home and you must return the dye. In that case, the monkey never became more intelligent as a result of the dye, and the monkey didn't improve value in terms of being dyed. So since it didn't increase the value of the monkey, the robber has no counterclaim for improvement when he returns the monkey. So what does Rashi mean? Rashi says that it's different with results to the fabric. If Shimon stole from Reuven dye and then he stole wool, he said that the combined efforts and his labor would supersede the value, that it would more than compensate respectively for the individual items stolen, and it would compensate for any loss that the owner had, because he couldn't return the dye and undye the wool. Do you get what I'm saying? In the case where there's either a glut in the market or you painting something, I just used the monkey as an example, at which there's no market-related improvement, or in fact, that color is not popular with wool because there's a surplus in the market, then in that case, would the robber have to pay compensation of the dye separately after he returns the monkey? Okay, that's all it's trying to say. Now, I wondered when I originally learned it, what the heck it brought a monkey for? Why didn't he just say he stole a brick and then he painted the brick with purple? Why specifically a monkey? So it comes about now, according to Ravina, that it's a slightly different case with a monkey. What are we talking about? He's saying we're dealing with a case where the wool belonged to one person now, and the dye ingredients belong to another. So here we're dealing with a case where the wool and the dye are for two separate people, and a wild monkey that was owned by no one came along and dyed the wool with those dye ingredients. However, what we're saying is here, the robber certainly stole the wool from one person, from Reuven. Levi stole the wool from Reuven, and he stole the dye from Shimon. But he put them in his garage, and a monkey came because he was living in KwaZulu-Natal, and he decided, the monkey, to paint the wool and do an artistic workshop with the dye that he found. So in other words, monkey ownerless, Reuven stole from Shimon and Levi. Shimon, he stole the wool, Levi, he stole the dye. Do you get what I'm saying? That's why I brought a monkey, because a monkey isn't responsible for its decision if it's ownerless, but because the guy robbed it, is he responsible since he robbed from either party, as far as that's concerned? Okay. So, in other words, again, the question is, according to the inquiry, is the improvement brought about by the dye ingredients considered something substantial on the wool? And the owner of the dyed ingredients can say to the owner of the wool, give me back my dye ingredients, or they are but you. Or perhaps the improvement brought about by the dye ingredients is not even considered something substantial in the wool, and the owner of the wool can say to the owner of the dyed ingredients, there's nothing of yours by me. Nothing whatsoever. Okay? So, in other words, since the improvement of the dye is not considered something material, the owner of the dye has no claim on the owner of the wool. For the dye has ceased to exist when it got absorbed by the wool and is not in the possession of the owner at all. Okay? So, obviously, there's an apparent difficulty. And that is because we learned this, guys, before. Is that we learned this because we did, I think, we got an excerpt from Bava Basra, where we learned that if you improve another person's, you break into another person's house and you improve something at that house without that permission, then you still have to, that owner of that house, as long as you haven't done damage, but you've improved. Say you've got this OCD fetish that you have to make sure that lawns are cut properly, and you're a professional gardener, but you're also a little bit mentally ill. So what you do is you break in people's premises, and during the day, you charge a fee, and you're an excellent landscaper, and you go there and you cut animal shapes like Alice in Wonderland of the hedges. You know, when you've got rabbits and hedges and everything, the oak's garden looks like Alice, and it was growing weeds before. And the guy went in while the oak was in Australia, and he spent a month fixing his garden, and came back to the most beautiful garden. Now, what do you do in a case like that? So if he incurred expenses, it's certainly a case where if the improvement was intentional, the owner of the home has to pay for those improvements because he'd pay for a service provider. Question in Bava Basra, which I'm sure is brought up, which I haven't learned yet. Arthur and I started a little bit, but I haven't got into it. And we weren't on that daf, by the way, Arthur, remember. We just started. Is that, do you pay for the labor that the landscaper would charge, or just pay for his actual base costs? So I don't know. But the point of it is there is that concept that you pay for it. So why wouldn't you pay the robber that improved the wool? And that answer is because the monkey that decided to intervene, according to Ravina, was a wild monkey, and the original owner had no intent of improvement. He had in his garage wool, and he had separately dyed. The oak was just a thief. He didn't want to improve anything. So since the monkey is wild, is there any sort of claim for the wool owner that he has to pay for improvement? And would they, in this case, no. But what happens with the owner of the dye? Is he entitled to get his compensation back as far as that's concerned? So Tosfot notes on the previous thing that if you derive a benefit from another, you pay for that benefit. And by the way, guys, we learned this in Bava Kamma in 19b, but it brought it up in Bava Basra. But not if the person was not cognitive of the fact that the improvement was done properly. So we don't know how to resolve the issue at the moment. We don't know if the owner of their dye is entitled to have his dye replaced. We certainly, I would suspect at this point, it's just a guess, because maybe it's resolved in a few Mishnahs, is that if you steal something and you use it, there's no reason why you shouldn't replace the cash equivalent if you can't return the actual dollar. That's my gut. But obviously, these principles are brought to us to teach us other features. In other words, what does the monkey teach us? About third-party accountability, about the fact that if you improve with intent, that the other person has to pay you, to the extent of if they have to pay you for labor or just material costs. So it's Bava Basra. The fact that if the wool and the dye combined, does that suffice to offset the cost if you're stealing it from one person? If you're stealing it from both, you may have to make restitution to the owner of the dye if a third party did it. That's what we got to determine. Not if the person did it himself, because you could turn around and say, well, you could turn around, obviously, in the straightforward case of them both making an improvement and say, well, look, the market-related value of dyed wool is better, and therefore you got compensated for the dye on the wool. It equals itself out, plus I never charged you for dyeing of the wool, so you're not paying for the labor factor. But that's why I had to bring a case of a surplus market. Right. So now what we want to learn is what's considered material to wool. In other words, what term is material? It means significant. So now what we learn is it a case of financial? Is it a financial factor? Or is it a factor maybe of aesthetic value? In other words, appearance. So we're going to go through issues now about Shemitah. We're going to go through issues now about the Ola. And we're going to go through issues of delayed and immediate benefits. Okay. It's going to start to get complicated. This has been the simple part. So I want you to come learn a resolution from the following Mishnah. And if you have a look at the source of that Mishnah, it's in Orla, chapter 3, verse 1. Okay? The garment that is dyed with the peels of the Orla fruit must be set afire. In other words, it must be burnt. So evidently, if you're dyeing the peels of an Orla fruit, if you're dyeing a garment with the peels of an Orla fruit, you can't use that garment. That garment must be burnt. So obviously, this is used as a proof that appearance is considered a significant factor. In other words, something present in the wool or the cotton. And therefore, if it's proved to be present, then the robber has to return the dye to the original owner or the financial equivalent. Okay? And we're trying to prove it from this Orla. Now, what is Orla fruit? So I'll tell you what, it's in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 23 to 24. The Torah states that fruit produced by a newly planted tree during its first 3 years is forbidden for benefit. And that's why we get this thing where a person has upshearing. Even my brother had it. It's funny, it's generally a Hasidic custom, but my brother did it with all his street boys, even though he was like from Rosh Sameach, where they only cut their hair after 3 years. It was a custom because you can't derive benefit or prune a fruit tree before 3 years. So if you do use its benefits in any way, you can't. Look, the fruit itself is obviously forbidden, but Kevin will tell you the peels and the shells are also forbidden. Okay, that's the bottom line. So the peels are used because it has like a pink hue, and or a light. What's the word, Kev? It's like a cerise, okay? And you break them down.
Cyan.
No. It's like more of a pink, like a cerise sort of thing, but it's more pastel-y. And if you break it down, it makes a garment from white into subtle pastel shade. But if it's under 3 years of the tree, you can't do it. It doesn't even have to be the fruit. It's the same thing with the peels and the shells of the fruit. The bark of the tree is different. That you can use because that doesn't actually damage the growth. So if you use it in a garment, it's deemed physically significant. That's what the Gemara is trying to propose, and therefore it's because of its physical significance that you have to burn it. If it is because it's physically significant, obviously dye on wool, then the robber can't claim it's not significant. It makes a significant improvement to the wool. He has to replace the dye back to the original owner. And there's no question about it. My question on this is whether it's significant or not. If he's used somebody else's product, he should replace it. But let's just go along this journey. I'll answer itself in due course. But the Gemara actually rejects the proof. And on what basis? Well, firstly, before it even gets there, you've got to know that if the appearance is not considered a form of continued existence, then the ola dye is not present in the garment. Consequently, guys, if the garment was worn, it wouldn't constitute benefiting from the ola. Okay? So there's two discussions at play. It's like, are you not allowed to use it because you're not allowed to use it? Are you not allowed to use it because you benefit? Say I make a dye and I'm really bad at this sort of hobby, and I take it just off white, where under the sun you can feel a tinge of peach. Tinge. Like when I say that, it's like white to cream, that you can't even see the difference. Whereas white to beige, you can see is a much more significant difference. Do you get what I'm saying? So if there hasn't been an appearance improvement, is that considered benefiting? Or is the fact that you use something forbidden and should be burned for its own sake? That's the argument that's coming for the Gemara. Because if the appearance is something significant in terms of a aesthetic improvement, then that would be a problem, and then the robber could never make that claim in a separate case of the wool that the dye is insignificant. If it's a case where the benefit is just something you can't use, irrespective of whether you can discern the physical difference in hue and tone, then you just can't benefit from its thumb. And it in no way proves the case of the robber having to pay. Okay. Have you all got me so far?
Yeah.
Guys, this is the easy part. I haven't even hit the hard part. The easy part.
Damon.
Yeah.
As this, no, I might be off the mark here. So if someone had used all appeals or something that was forbidden on a stolen garment, or someone bought the garment in good faith, and it has to be burnt, then there has to be a claim against the seller. Is this what we're coming to?
No.
Off the mark completely.
No, you're off the mark completely, but I think it's a relevant point and a separate issue. Firstly, if anybody was selling you a garment, you would have to prove that they in fact used all byproducts, which is very difficult to prove. Number two, the case we're dealing with has nothing to do with reparations. If somebody sold you something that is forbidden for use and it was burnt. Okay, we're saying that nobody's burning it for you. You've got to burn it yourself. So the thing of it is, this case isn't trying to prove any sort of this case isn't trying to prove any sort of liability for a third party doing it for you. This case is trying to ask you is, if you dye with the ola fruit, is the garment to be burnt because you are benefiting from the dye, meaning that you've gone from a white garment to a peach garment and you love the color and you're benefiting from that which is forbidden, and that is the reason why you're burning it? Or are you burning it because you are not allowed to use it, whether or not you see the benefit in it or not? In other words, you dyed it yourself. It was so lousy that you couldn't even see any color improvement. In fact, it might have looked even shoddier. You could hardly notice a difference. It might have even looked more dirty. But is the fact that the appearance and therefore an appearance equals enjoyment equals benefit, that's the reason you burn it? Or are you burning it because you're not allowed to use it, irrespective of whether there's a benefit or not? That's the question. And if it's purely for the fact that you're not allowed to use it, and it's not because it provided some sort of a appearance change, a significant change to the garment, a color change, if you will, then that could not prove and go for the fact that it proves that using dye on wool is a significant change, where the robber has got a claimant against him. You get what I'm saying? So that's what we're trying to prove. It's not about third-party liability. Let me just finish one little point. So Rava rejects the proof on the basis that the Torah specifically prohibited a benefit that is visible to the eyes. Okay? And if he explicitly prohibited that, because it's been taught in the Brisa, the verse states with respect to the Ola prohibition, its fruit shall be forbidden to you, they shall not be eaten. From this, I know only that there's a prohibition against eating Ola. But, as the Gemara said, how do I know that one may not benefit from it, nor die with it, nor kindle a lamp with it? So the Torah states in the earlier parts of the verse, and you shall treat its fruit as forbidden, as shall be forbidden to you, they shall not be eaten, to include all of these cases in the prohibition. In other words, the triple meaning of the Ola in the Chumash is stating there's a general benefit that is forbidden. Okay? There's benefiting of eating, of dying, and of using it as fuel in a lamp. Okay? So accordingly, the reason the Mishnah prohibits wearing a garment dyed with Ola is not because the dye is considered something material or significant to the fabric, but because the Torah specifically prohibits by means of the Chumash. This phrase, visual benefit derived from the consumption of Ola fruit, for example. But it's not because it might have gained a higher market-related value. Do you get what I'm saying? So that's what we've got to also deal with. And even Tosfos says that if that's the case, as a proof that dye is not considered something material in the wool, then benefiting from a garment dyed with Ola would constitute benefiting from Ola itself. It would be in the general prohibition. Okay? So we don't know, according to Tosfot, if it's because that Ola is an exception to the rule or it actually sets up a source for the rule. And because that's the case, we can't use this particular Ola as an example. In other words, we don't know if it's an exception and or it proves this case and lays out the halacha for everything else. You get what I'm saying? All right, guys, I hope that was a decent share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. How are you feeling today?
Like I got hit by a toy train, not a big train, a little toy train. I threw somebody, but like somebody threw it at my head. At least
a toy train's better than a full steam, full
yeah.
blown
But
one.
I tell you something. From when I spoke to you, Oaks, I was out 20 minutes. I had a power nap.